Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, May 30th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist. I got to pause for a second because on the most recent Glop Culture podcast that I was actually not on due to family matters, Jonah Goldberg and Rob Long were on together, and they made fun of me for calling Matt the Washington commentary columnist because this is the Commentary Magazine podcast. And I take grave offense at this because I call him that because his column is called Washington Commentary, as my column is called Editor's Commentary, as Christine's column is called Media Commentary. That is a deliberate play on the magazine's name, and therefore, so our Washington commentary columnist, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hello, John.
And joining us today, the editor, Poobah Panjandra of Jewish Insider, legendary Washington journalist, Josh Kraushaar. Hi, Josh.
Hey, John. It's a pleasure to be back on the podcast. Josh is also a Washington commentary columnist, but not for commentary.
Right, but specifically, he is a generic Washington commentary columnist, whereas you hold the Washington commentary chair in Washington.
Of all the chairs, I hold many chairs, and among them is the Washington commentary column.
Yes. Gentlemen, as Donald Trump's trial enters, the jury deliberations enter their second day, you could be forgiven for believing, based on all of the political news of the last a week, that rather than being trapped in a courthouse with a possible to likely conviction for the first time in American presidential history, that Donald Trump is being borne aloft on the wings of eagles, as polling is now suggesting not only that he is maintaining his small but steady lead nationally, but that in state after state that he lost, he is sort of like pulling up in the hot rod up to even or like close to leading Biden. And I'm talking about Virginia, where there was a poll that has them basically tied at 42. I'm talking about Minnesota, where they are close to tied, and I think New Hampshire. So these three states that Biden won in 2020, and that, at least in the case of Virginia and Minnesota, Trump did not win in 2016. Like, that's the game. Like, that's, I mean, right now, if you froze the election, I think, and you use some of these poll numbers and you gave Trump a little bit of an edge, he'd win 330 or 340 electoral votes. So, if you're a Democrat, you got to be saying, uh-oh.
Well, the interesting thing about the Virginia result is Republicans haven't won Virginia in 20 years at the presidential level, nor have they won Nevada in 20 years at the presidential level. Nevada is almost out of reach for Biden at this point. I mean, Trump's lead is outside the margin of error. It has been consistently for months. John Ralston, the grand poobah, since we're using that term of Nevada
he holds
politics,
the Nevada independent chair at the Nevada.
He is. I mean, he's been a long time journalist, but he's kind of like for those of a certain age will recall David Broder's, aura in Washington, and John Ralston has the same aura in Nevada. What he says is authoritative, and he's on X all the time saying Biden is in deep, deep trouble in Nevada. So you have Nevada flipping, you have Virginia competitive, with Biden opening up a campaign office there, which is unusual. The map is expanding.
Trump opening a campaign office. With Trump,
I don't think
Biden,
Trump has
Biden
many,
having to open a campaign office.
But I don't know if Trump has campaign offices, which is part of his problem long term.
Right.
But Biden has to have a campaign office in a place where Democrats have won for a generation. the map is expanding in ways favorable to Trump. And interestingly, the map is looking more like the 2004 map. And that's what I find interesting, because that 2004 map was the Bush country map, John. That was your book. That was the Red America. And Bush won, of course, without the Rust Belt states, without the Blue Wall states. And while at the moment the Blue Wall states are Biden's only path toward victory, I'm beginning to contemplate a scenario in which Trump wins without them. And he wins like George W. Bush did a generation ago.
But a larger Bush won 286 electoral votes in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Ohio was the cap state that pushed him over the top. Trump's beyond that, right? Trump and Biden traded electoral vote. Like Trump won 306 in 2016. Biden won, or he ended up winning 304 because there were two faithless electors. Biden won 306 in 2020. Again, as you say, Trump appears to be expanding the map, and Biden is not expanding the map. Not only is Biden not expanding the map, but in North Carolina, which is the other interesting electoral result we've seen in the last week, there is a really crazy Republican candidate for governor. And I say crazy advisedly, and he's tied. So this would suggest that Biden, in a place like North Carolina, that he might conceivably, in a scenario where he's challenging Trump and Trump states, that would be the state, right? I mean, Obama won North Carolina,
right?
Large African-American population, all of that. Like, he may have negative coattails. Like that if this gubernatorial candidate is doing well, even though he's a total lunatic, that's also an interesting bit of, I don't know what you would call it, like the entrails that the soothsayers would use to look at where things are going.
I like Matt's 2004 comparison, if only a reminder that this is a race that's going to come down to, I think, those blue wall states in the Midwest. And 2004 was a competitive election. It was a different type of election. It feels like ages ago. But the one silver lining for Biden amid all this bad news is that he is still competitive in the states that Democrats had reliably won in the 80s, 90s, and into that 2004 election: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And look, Biden was in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia yesterday. I think it was pretty notable that he was trying to win over African American voters at a school in Philadelphia. That's not what you want to be doing right before June to get the base on your side. There is sort of an interesting dynamic when you look under the hood of the polling numbers, in that Biden is struggling remarkably for a Democrat when it comes to some core elements of the base, African Americans most notably, younger voters, Hispanics. He's doing a little, I wouldn't say better, but he's doing credibly with seniors, which have long made up the most reliable voting bloc, and one that had trended more to the Republican side in recent elections. But that isn't enough if you can't keep your coalition together. And then when you look at the big picture, John, I mean, it's just, if you took Trump's name and Biden's name off of all these polls, and you just showed me the national data, and you have a president, an incumbent, sitting at around 40% job approval, you have about 3/4 of the country thinking the country's heading in the wrong direction, the economy is not doing well. And you look at the central message that Biden ran on back in 2020, being the return to normalcy, and then you see inflation elevated, crime elevated, the rise of anti-Semitism, the chaos on campus, I mean, immigration, the crisis at the border. I mean, that goes against the main Biden message that got him elected in the first place. So the fundamentals are strongly tilted against this president, and he has lower job approval ratings at this point in his presidency than George H.W. Bush did in 1992 and Jimmy Carter did in 1980, and those are just huge red flags for any incumbent.
let's take 2004 in a slightly different way, Abe. Um, so elections tend to be referenda on the incumbent. And sometimes when the incumbent wins, they flip that script. In 2012, Obama managed to make the election in part a referendum on his challenger, Mitt Romney, and his behavior as a hedge funder who, gave people cancer somehow magically and, killed dogs and I don't know what else. In 2004, the path of 2004 was that the Democrats, in the person of John Kerry, were working to make the election of 2004 a referendum on the incumbent and particularly his prosecution of the war in Iraq. And then as September rolled around, the conventions were over, George W. Bush embraced Iraq and made a series of speeches and public appearances and talked about, connected 9/11 to Iraq, to terrorism, and ran straight at his weakness and accepted the challenge of the election being about the incumbent and pretty much squeaked in with a victory. If we look at this dynamic, the only thing that you could look at and say that Biden could do is the thing that he's been doing for 3 years without result, which is somehow embracing his most problematic element with the electorate, which is his conduct with the economy, and saying, here's why I've actually done a really good job with the economy, which is exactly what he's been doing, and nobody is buying it. So I'm not sure, if you go to the 2004 dynamic, what Biden uses to whipsaw himself into a position where the referendum on the incumbent speaks well of the incumbent. Because if it doesn't,
it's a much heavier lift to try to sell your performance on a bad economy that everyone is experiencing every day than to say, hey, that war that's going on over there that you've been seeing images of hasn't gone so well, but now we're on the right track. Trust me, we're pulling it together. Not all of America is there. That's a story that you can convince people of. You can't convince people that the economy is good when they're living through tough times. I think the other major issue for Biden that he at times has sort of stumblingly tried to take head on is himself, is his age, his abilities, his cognitive challenges at this point. That also, you can't really tell a convincing story about if you're not telling the truth. That is also, it's another self-evident circumstance that you can't talk people out of.
And to that point, after his rally in Philadelphia yesterday that Josh mentioned, Biden and Dr. Jill went to their home in Rehoboth, where they will remain today, Thursday, May 30th. This is the president of the United States in the middle of a re-election campaign that he's losing. And as Josh mentioned, time is the window's kind of starting to close here. I mean, it's going to be June in 48 hours. And, early voting begins in the middle of September. And he's resting. Why? Because he's just not up to the job. He's not up to the job. Yeah, he's tired.
Wait,
I want to make one point about the 2004 thing, though, on how you change and what Bush did. And I think it's worth mentioning. So Iraq was a bad issue for Bush in 2004. The weapons there were no weapons, right? The K report came in, said we can't find anything. The insurgency was beginning. You had Abu Ghraib in the middle of the spring of 2004, and Ted Kennedy defaming the United States by saying Saddam Hussein's torture chambers are open under new management. Iraq was bad. Bush successfully changed the issue from Iraq to 9/11. and talk. And the Republican convention in 2004 was all about 9/11. New York was the site of the convention. Different Rudy Giuliani a generation ago, he was talking about 9/11. It was Bush's strength and leadership in 9/11 that I think carried the day over Iraq. And the other thing Bush did as an incumbent was the Bush campaign went hard into John Kerry. And if you think about the speech that I still remember and still sometimes quote to myself from that convention in 2004, it was Zell Miller, then a Democrat.
Nothing makes this old Marine matter.
Yeah. Going laying into John Kerry about then listing the weapon systems that John Kerry had voted against. And he asked that great question. He said something, what did he say? He said, John Kerry would have the United Nations decide what America needs defending. I want Bush to decide. And the whole crowd went nuts. And that was, okay, this is basically over. At least it wasn't my mind. So Biden's play is make it about Trump. But as you say, John, that's what he's been trying to do for 3.5 years now. And it doesn't seem to make any difference because at the end of the day, this election is about Biden, not Trump.
Also, I just want to say, I think it's harder to make it about Trump now because Trump's been put in a bit of a box. And I know that was, a sort of tactical move on the part of his enemies. But I think it helps him. Because Trump in the box is a more likable Trump. If Trump is at large and being crazy and, walking all over the horizon and unleashed, then you can make it about Trump.
Something just occurs to me about Trump and the Democrats now and the Republicans and the people who eventually became never Trumpers in 2015 and 2016. We were all completely assured in November and December of 2015 that Trump would blow himself up. Couldn't help it. It was his nature. It's the scorpion, and the whatever. It was going to happen. And guess what? It didn't happen. And they have been betting now for 2 years on the same dynamic. That Trump's own recklessness and outrageousness and all of that would be the thing that would take him down, and that they sort of just needed to help arrange it so that he was the nominee so that they could let him blow himself up. And it is an interesting fact that this is how it worked, because history would tell you, don't use that strategy. Somebody tried it already and it didn't work out. It took a once in a century pandemic and an inconstant hand with that pandemic that did that.
Well, I would argue that quietly and probably underreported is the fact that Trump's campaign has been quietly a whole lot more savvy, sophisticated, targeted with the constituencies he's going to need to win over than I think anyone ever imagined. I mean, just look at the last couple of weeks. John, I know you've talked a lot about the Wildwood rally a couple of weeks ago. Granted, it was near the courthouse in Manhattan, but Trump was on message when it came to attacking Biden over the
Wildwood's not that close, by the way. It's 3 hours from New York City. Like Biden doesn't seem to travel more than an hour and a half outside of Washington. I mean, Trump did get on a helicopter. Wildwood is right next to Cape May and Atlantic City. Like it's not like the Bronx, which was 20 minutes from the courthouse or a half an hour from the courthouse. Anyway,
it's a good point. Yeah,
about relative energy. Yeah,
but the same distance as DC from Rehoboth. I mean, it does show that Biden has a geographic sort of limitation at times.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I thought the message, Trump has been off message when it comes to his support for Israel at times, but he was on message at that rally. He really lit into the rise of anti-Semitism on campus and was very focused insofar as Trump we're grading on a curve here, but I thought he got the talking points and the arguments he needed to make from that event. Going to the Bronx, an unusual stop for a Republican presidential nominee. But when you look at, the demographic trends, there is the small incremental gain that Trump has been making with working class Hispanic and African American voters. And it's not that it's going to move the numbers a whole lot in the Bronx itself, but in other key states where you have those constituencies, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, among them, that is a message that was very effective. And then I also look at sort of where the kind of Trump skeptical Republicans are now as compared to a couple of years ago, and Nikki Haley says she's going to vote for him. Steve Schwartzman, who was one of the most vocally anti-Trump businessmen, now jumping on the Trump train. You have Trump. Even Trump has sort of endorsed some of the more establishment-oriented Republicans against MAGA or America First type Republicans in primaries. In Virginia, he's gotten behind Dave McCormick's Senate race. In Pennsylvania, despite some disputes between the two in the last election. I mean, he's actually acting in a very strategic way to keep the party as a big tent between the MAGA wing and the traditional wing of the party. And that's something you did not see in 2020, you did not see in 2016, and it's a sign of a party that's united, where the Democrats are showing a lot more division.
Yeah, that Politico piece from earlier in the week that I know you talked about on the podcast. I mean, Democrats in full-blown panic. That's Politico. That is evidence of a party that does not really know what to do and is clearly not only disheveled, but also kind of disillusioned and unenthusiastic. But I will say, though, as Josh mentioned earlier, the blue wall states are very, I mean, if you have to ask, okay, so the racial realignment is, I think, a huge story in this election. But the flip side of that is that the older white voters in the Rust Belt are kind of with Biden. I mean, they're stickier than a lot of other voters throughout the country. And you have to ask why that might be. I mean, these are the same voters who put Trump in 2016. And they're kind of on the fence right now. I mean, those three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, they're very close. They're all toss-ups. Trump seems to have, if you really look at the minutia of these polls, Trump seems to have a slight advantage in at least two of the three, and that would be enough to win the election. And they also tend to vote together. So if two go one way, I'd assume the third would go the same way. But the fact that there's a deep reluctance there, I think, is important, and it needs to be addressed by the Trump campaign. You wonder how they might do that. I think it might play into the VP selection. I think that it's an argument for Doug Burgum, right? Because from North Dakota borders Minnesota. He appeared at the recent Minnesota rally. He had made a joke about thanking all the Minnesotans for sending their kids to college in North Dakota, which is a thing. It also is an argument potentially for J.D. Vance on the ticket. If they think that they need to kind of boost their numbers among white working class voters in the Great Lakes states, well, J.D.'s there. He definitely has kind of assumed the catbird seat when it comes to the white working class vote. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't know, but that's certainly how it's perceived in D.C. They have to do something, the Trump people, I think, in order to get those three states out of Biden's grasp. And if they do that, then this election really could be over by September.
I want to say one other thing about the inability of the Biden people to figure out how to run for president, and how influenced they are in a way that people don't realize by the way they are covered by the mainstream media, who, remember, despite their getting angry and annoyed, they understand as sort of part of their camp, or, that the people in them are culturally and personally connected to them. This goes to the complete miscoverage and misunderstanding of the Bronx rally. People keep talking about how Trump is making historic inroads with African Americans, which of course is a huge story because African Americans vote 11, 12% for for Republicans historically, and that somehow this rally in the Bronx was a rally to speak to that. You only think that because you don't understand New York. New York is not a black city. New York is a Hispanic city. The Bronx is 58% Hispanic. You go to South Crotona Park to have a rally in the Bronx, that is a rally to speak to Latinos, not to black people. And it's covered not only by the local media, but some of the most listened to AM radio station in New York City is a Spanish language station. Now, I don't know how hostile they are. I don't know what their coverage is like. But the idea that you go somewhere, Josh mentioned this, and sort of do events that will then maybe amplify outward. This is something, for some reason, that people in Washington got completely wrong, which leads me to believe that the Biden team, which is relying on them for intelligence because they are, after all, sympathetic, despite, again, Biden's anger at them, may be getting all kinds of things wrong about America and where there are opportunities.
Well, think about going to Morehouse College and telling the graduating class, America hates you and you may end up dead. I mean, talk about getting things wrong. The attitude toward ethnic politics in the United States is frozen in time in this administration. Partly frozen in 2020 and thinking that we're still living in that moment, which we are definitely not. But also, Washington liberals have a reflex where they view all ethnic politics through the black-white frame. And it's the black-white frame of 1964. And so the way that you interpret the Bronx rally is, of course it's about white-black relations. It's Trump trying to get African-American men. Well, Trump's trying to get African-American male voters for sure, and a lot of them are for Trump. But there's also this huge population, Hispanic America, which is not one thing. It's not monolithic. It's Venezuelans, it's Cubans, it's Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, all throughout Latin America, different immigrant groups. You can't reduce it to simple white-black politics circa 1968, like so many Washington liberals do. It just doesn't work. And one of the most revealing comments out of the Bronx rally was, I don't know whether it's a Cuban American or even like a Vietnamese American. I mean, of course, because huge Asian population in New York City as well. But one of the voters was talking to the reporter and said, look, my family came from a communist country. It doesn't work. We don't want socialism here in America. That's the worst. And so that's something the Democrats, they don't even know what to do with, because they're lionizing Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and AOC.
Well, and there's also within the black community, within the Hispanic community, there's a huge generational divide, which, to Matt's point, I think Biden is running the same playbook of how Democrats have reached out to the black community, for instance, for decades. I listened to some of his speech at Girard College yesterday, and it was literally fear tactics, the type of rhetoric you would expect from the 1980s and 1990s, in a way to kind of say that Trump would roll back all the civil rights gains and would threaten sort of the well-being on a day-to-day basis of black Americans. And you look at the polls, you talk to black voters, you listen to the rhetoric at that Bronx rally, and their main concern is financial. Can they get ahead day to day? Can they pay the bills? It's not there's a big disconnect even in the black community among the older leaders, civil rights leaders, the Al Sharptons, if you will, with the younger voters who are much more economically concerned, which frankly all Americans are worried and anxious about the state of the economy.
And we just have breaking, as we are taping this, the news that the economy grew by a whopping 1%. In the last quarter, 1.1%. So congratulations to the Biden administration on having yet another really bad news story to cope with. I mean, the thing is that America is, of course, obsessed with the black-white frame, as it should be. But that's not even that's not the story of this campaign. The story of this campaign is that they're at parity among Hispanics, according to all the polling, 40-40. Now, George W. Bush supposedly got 40 to 44% of the Hispanic vote in 2004. So this wouldn't be unprecedented, though he had been a politician who had basically focused like a laser beam as governor of Texas and then as president on this constituency and spoke Spanish and did all this stuff, which Trump isn't doing. Supposedly, Trump should be in hot water with them because he's so cruel to the migrants, thus again missing a key element of the Hispanic base, in which we also heard from people at the Bronx rally, and that if people were able to listen, they would hear, which is people who came into the United States legally don't like it, particularly if they're one generation removed, that all these people are coming in illegally. They stood online. They spent 5 years waiting to get a green card. They took a test. They had to do that. They followed the rules, and now you have people almost, let's take it to a upper middle class, why was everybody outraged when it turned out that people were taking a side door into college admissions through these fake athletic scholarships? Because we're doing it the way they told us to do it, and then there are these people using a trick, and that makes people madder than people like us who are here. And that emotion, that sotto voce emotion, which again, 4 or 5 different people in interviews I saw in the Bronx were saying it was send them home was the major rallying cry at the Bronx rally. Send them home, deport them. It's very interesting. And again, Democrats are not allowing themselves.
I want to ask Josh about another voting group that I am keenly interested in, and that is Jewish voters. Because in the midst of October 7th and the ramifications of the attack, and then Biden's policies beginning with not vetoing the anti-Israel resolution at the United Nations, up to the threat to withhold weapons, anecdotally, I hear a lot of Jewish American voters saying, I can't do it. I can't do it. That doesn't mean they're going to vote for Trump, but does mean in many cases they're going to sit out the election. Is there any indications from your seat at Jewish Insider that Biden is hurting with the Jewish vote?
Well, I think the bigger implication of everything that's gone on in Middle East politics and how it's going to affect domestic politics is going to happen down ballot and within the Democratic Party. And I don't think Trump is going to make significant gains. I think maybe Jewish voters may stay home or may reluctantly vote for Biden. I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence that there's a swing to Trump. I've heard a lot of anger in the last few weeks, certainly since that CNN interview that Biden gave, threatening to condition offensive aid to Israel. That sparked a groundswell of friends and people I've heard from saying that they might actually consider not voting or maybe even think about voting for Trump. But I think writ large, Biden is going to hold on to the 70% or so of the Jewish vote that he got in 2020, maybe a little bit less, but I think in that same ballpark. But where I see the divide happening, where I see the movement happening, is in some of these Senate races. I'm watching Pennsylvania, where you have Dave McCormick, who's run the Republican nominee there, run as a very stalwart supporter of Israel against anti-Semitism on campuses, was one of the first leaders to speak out against the University of Pennsylvania. Former President McGill has really attacked these encampments that a lot of Democrats have been slow to react to. So I think a Senate race like the Pennsylvania race, there are a few House contests where I'm watching very, very closely, the Jamal Bowman, George Latimer primary at the end of the month in June. I think Bowman is the underdog right now, based on everything I'm hearing in that
He's the
race.
sitting congressman he's a Black Lives Matter congressman who won a classically Jewish seat that was held by Eliot Engel for like 30 years. Took it away from him as the AOC type candidate, has been horrific since October 7th. And the Westchester County executive, George Latimer, is primarying him. And the race is turning on Israel. Like I don't even think they're talking about anything else.
And Jamal Bowman can't pull any fire alarm to stop it. There's no electoral fire alarm that he can pull to pause this election.
But John, it is unusual for any incumbent, even controversial ones, to be in such deep trouble in a primary. You maybe throughout the whole election year, you might see 2 or 3 total. Yeah. The fact that you have Bowman almost looking like he's acting like a loser in the run up to his primary. Cori Bush is in deep trouble in an August primary. Same squad, same anti-Israel radical activism. That is a flashing red light within the Democratic Party, and I think they understand the message. I think they understand that they have to not just distance themselves from these radicals, these anti-Israel types, but they may need to have more of a sister soldier type moment. I think that's part of the Biden problem, that he looks weak in confronting the radicalism that's been growing within his own party.
I know it's hard to poll Jewish voters, but I would be interested in a poll of Jewish voters disaggregated by Jewish voters for whom Israel is the number one voting issue, and to look at that population and to see how they're going. I'd wonder if Biden is still pulling this typical 70% among that slice.
I can answer that question.
Please.
That answer. I mean, I can answer that question without a poll.
Okay.
The answer is no.
Right.
The answer is that Biden, for people for whom Israel is the number one issue, Biden is likely now losing the majority of those voters. However, when we take the Jewish vote, we are talking about people who self-identify as Jews. One thing we know about people who self-identify as Jews from sort of like a quadrennial surveys of Jews by Pew and stuff like that is a lot of people identify as Jews who aren't really Jews, which actually ups the Jewish number in America demographically. But like in one of these polls 10 years ago, 31% of people who said they were Jews also said they believed in the divinity of Christ.
Yeah.
So when you have that kind of thing, the number, that's why it's so hard to poll Jews. I am confident in saying, based on anecdotal evidence, which I would not ordinarily say, that Democrats who are Jews, for whom Zionism is a number one issue, are sounding like Steve Bannon in 2016. I mean, I'm talking about, I was at a benefit dinner for my Jewish day school, classic Jewish population, committed Zionists, New York liberals, all of that. 2 questions emerged, interestingly, I thought. One of which is, anybody who has kids in college, you walk up to them and you say, how is it? That's not, how's it going?
Right.
Does she like it? Did she get into the sorority she likes? Is she on the school
group
paper?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, how is it? Can she cross the campus? Has anyone spat on her? How big are the encampments? Can she go to the dining hall? Okay, again, this is a subsection even of this population. That is the question that people are answering. Have you been directly attacked? You or your family been directly attacked? He is dead with those people. That is my estimation based on what I'm hearing. A lot of them are volunteering that they will vote for Trump, people who would have said in 2016 that they would rather jump into the Hudson than vote for Trump. Doesn't matter. So is that a representative population? In this case, yes, alone among all cases, but they may make up 20% of the overall Jewish population in the United States in that sense. But I feel as I've never felt. I never thought like, oh, the Jewish vote is good. They should vote for. I mean, what Democrats have terrible value. 2012, Democrats booed Jerusalem. Jews should vote for. Basically the vote is now settled to like 70-30 or 73-27 or something like that. That's been the case, and I don't know what the overall effect will be. But even more important than that is the withdrawal of financial support on the part of major Jewish donors, not only to Jewish institutions, but I'm guessing to Democratic politicians who I will bet you are finding themselves in a new kind of pickle if they need money going to the ordinary wellspring that they have relied upon. Jewish money in politics is wildly disproportionate to Jewish population numbers. And Democrats have wildly relied on Jewish donors to help them, in close cases. And this should have been the case this year because of liberal Jews and abortion. And then October 7th happened.
Now, I have a question. Christian Zionists in America are already overwhelmingly Republican anyway, right? There's no significant portion of Christian Zionists, Democrats to that would be flipped here. That would be turned off.
Yeah, as far as we know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, again, it's kind of hard you have to split test your polling and then assume.
Well, there might be some African-American church ladies,
right,
who are Christian Zionists, Christian Zionists, but that attachment to the Democratic Party is very, very strong. I mean, just what John was just saying put me in mind, of course, of Milton Himmelfarb's quip that Jews are like Episcopalians, but vote like Puerto Ricans. Not in 2024.
Or they'll vote like Puerto Ricans. They're voting like Puerto Ricans now.
Yeah, well, right. The ones for whom Israel is important. Yeah, right. Because the Puerto Rican vote is going to be geared toward Trump.
It might, yeah.
Well, and the one thing that I am hearing, and I think is an overwhelming sentiment, is that if you asked Jewish voters, what is a bigger threat to your livelihood, to Israel? Is it the left, or in anti-Semitism? Is it the left, or is it the right? I think a few years ago would have been about the same. I think overwhelmingly the threat is seen on the left, and that's why you're seeing so much engagement from even Democratic groups in these primaries. That there is a civil war of sorts going on. And there's I think we're at a tipping point right now where all you have to do is look at the polls, look at support for Israel, look at tolerance of anti-Semitism, reaction to the campus protests. Democrats are divided, or if there's a majority against the anti-Semitism, it's much smaller than it used to be. So I think a lot of these internal fights are really going to be consequential down the line, because we saw this in England, by the way, when Jeremy Corbyn got the reins of the Labour Party, the party went off the rails, and it took years for them to overcome that problem. And I think we're at a sort of similar moment early on in the Democratic Party, where there's a lot at stake internally as much as externally.
Look, in 1984, let me go back and play another history game. So in 1980, Reagan got what is, I think, classically as the largest Jewish vote for Republicans since the 1920s or the 1940s. There were Jewish Republicans all over the Northeast because the Democratic Party was seen as segregationist, and Jewish liberals actually were Republicans. But after Jimmy Carter's presidency, or in the midst of Jimmy Carter's presidency, exit polling suggested that 39% of Jewish voters had gone for Reagan in 1980. Precinct data suggested, if you disaggregated precinct data, that it was probably closer to 50%. And so there was this idea, maybe there was this realignment going on. 1984 comes around. Reagan was pretty good on Israel, though he was, there was some bad stuff in the way he treated Israel after Lebanon, and Caspar Weinberger, the defense secretary, talking crap about Israel and all of that. But they went 1984, Republican convention, Reagan and Nancy show up at the big prayer breakfast.
Dallas,
and
right?
This is a different generation. This is 2 generations ago. And that's what did it. Word went out. They're siding with the Christian. They are sucking up.
Didn't Mondale call Reagan like Ayatollah?
Yeah. They're sucking up to the Christians. The Christians want prayer in schools. This is our historical enemy, right? Again, misunderstanding whom Reagan was talking to, since he was talking to people who believed more than the Jews believed that the Jews are the chosen people, and who are about to undergo this massive shift toward political Zionism. They had not quite gotten there yet, but were about to. And that was the end of the Jewish surge among Democrat or among the Republican surge among Jews. And then 8 years later, the most hostile administration till Barack Obama's, George H.W. Bush, gets 11% of the Jewish vote, because it's very clear that James Baker, his Secretary of State, hates Israel, don't like Jews too much, and Bush don't either. And there was no way of, saying he gets 11% of the Jewish vote. That's 32 years ago. And we're now in a different world, in a different atmosphere. And the personal threat to American Jews is, of course, unprecedented. The personal security threat, sense of threat, not just to how do you handle Israel? How are you talking about Israel? American Jews don't feel safe in America. American Jews with kids in schools are worried about their kids. This is a new thing, and it's a new phenomenon. It doesn't matter very much electorally. I mean, the only place that it might matter electorally is Pennsylvania. Conceivably, there's enough of a Jewish vote that if it were like razor thin close, could be very, Jews could make a 10,000 vote margin somehow if in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, they say I can't vote for Biden. But it's something else. I think a different thing. All right, so Matt,
Yes,
you're up today with commentary.
Thank you, John. But before I give my recommendation, I do have to say, listeners can't see this, but over your left shoulder for the duration of the podcast has been a series of coats that are black, green, and red. And I just have to say, I don't know whether you're trying to send some type of pro-Hamas signal here, or whether it's a cry for help. I am saying there's going to be watermelon somewhere in the background. But
I am in my son's room.
Okay.
And you're seeing his coat rack.
I think for the next time, we should rearrange the coats so that I'm not triggered. I
literally had no idea this was happening. I now see it over my own shoulder on the Zoom. And I just want to assure you.
Can we replace those coats with white and blue, please?
Okay.
White and blue, and then I'll be much calmer. That's all I had to say. Now I'm going to give my recommendation. The recommendation is this. I did some math this morning. I've read over 50 books by Stephen King up to this point in my life, in my early 40s. And I'm actually reading as we speak. Well, not as we speak, but this week I'm reading the 54th book. It's Stephen King's new short story collection, You Like It Darker. It's excellent so far. King, a couple things about King. He can be hit or miss. Past few story collections I haven't been able to get into as much as I love and return to the early collections like Night Shift and Skeleton Crew, different seasons. There was one about 12 years ago called Just After Sunset, which is very good. So far, You Like It Darker is similar to that, so I'm really enjoying the stories. The other thing about King, especially since 2016, politics has been surfaced more and more in his work. Usually it's like an offhand reference. This is part of the longer term, you might call secular trend in King, which is because he's so Stephen King-like, so rich, so famous, he's somewhat removed from the material conditions of working class Maine, which saturated his early work, and I think is one of the reasons it's still so incredible to return to. But other than a few kind of jibes at the Trump Republicans here and there in these stories, they're very creepy and very good. So my recommendation today is the new Stephen King collection, You Like It Darker, which you can find pretty easily, I'd imagine.
Okay, I gotta take pride of place here in one way.
Yes.
In 1974, when I was 13 years old, I was going to my mother's office at 53rd and 5th in New York, and there was a Doubleday bookstore on the corner. And I went into the Doubleday bookstore on the corner, and there was on the new releases shelf a book sitting there called Carrie that had just been published, and I bought it. This may have been the day or 2 days after it was first
That was his
released.
first publisher.
I am one of the first. I was one of the first readers of Stephen King in hardcover, totally by happenstance. And that book, which is a very unusual book, if you've seen the movie or something, it's written as a kind of series of letters, reports. It was a certain style at the time to write books in this fashion. And it was so fantastic that, and then I think Salem's Lot came out not much, like 9 months later or something like that. And it was clear something very, very big was going on. One last thing about King, which is interesting in terms of his, sort of like very conventional left-wing politics and all that, is that his early work was very religious, weirdly religious. The Stand is a book that sort of recapitulates the creation of a kind of Jewish, like biblical Jewish state as a way of counteracting this world that the devil is creating. Very Christian in its emphasis, strikingly so. And so it's sort of interesting how much he has become a kind of voice of classic secular liberalism since he went the other way. But in his great book, Danse Macabre, which is the best piece of writing on horror fiction, right? He says horror is a conservative medium. Horror is always about what happens when people break convention and how kind of Old Testament rules say, like the second paragraph of the Shema that Jews read every day. Oh boy, are you going to get it? Step out of line, break the rules of society, and all of nature is going to shatter and come after you. So it's kind of interesting.
He still has a sense of humor, though. Last year at the I think it was a antitrust trial that the big publishers were involved in, and he was called as a witness, and he came to Washington, D.C. To the courtroom. He took the stand in the trial, and one of the lawyers asked, can you state your name? He said, Stephen King. And they said, can you state your profession? And King said, I'm a freelance writer. So, yeah, he's still pretty awesome.
One late breaking, oh my God, Biden pull the, Jamal Bowman pull the fire alarm nationally moment has come across my Ken just before we close here. NPR Marist has come out with a poll of independent voters. Trump up 12.
Yeah.
Goodbye, Biden.
Yeah.
Wow. Like if Trump wins independence by 10, again, like there's no calculus.
It'd be a 19-point swing since 2020. Yeah. I think he lost them by 7. Yeah. Or even more in 2020. Maybe he won. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So.
I mean, I don't even know how to suss that out. Like, I don't know how you put lipstick on that pig if you're the Biden campaign today.
Well, Dr. Jill told The View, John, yesterday that good will triumph over evil. So there you have it.
Okay. Oh, well, that's okay. That's Stephen King. There we go. It's The Stand. Biden is Mother Abigail, and Trump is Randall Flagg. Josh Kraushaar, thank you so much for your wisdom and taking time today. And everybody must read Jewish Insider, whether you're Jewish or not. Some of the best reporting on Washington, American social trends, and particularly after October 7th, the institutional crisis on how to handle this outbreak of anti-Semitism. Just a fantastic resource. So thanks, Jay. So what is the actual URL?
Well, thanks, John. It's jewishinsider.com. And always updating with breaking news, reporting, analysis about all the issues facing Israel, campus anti-Semitism, all the craziness in this world. We're covering it. We're the crushing morosity that you can rely on an hourly basis at Jewish Insider. So
and a really great morning newsletter that I commend to everybody. So if you go there and they ask and you get that pop-up that says subscribe to our morning newsletter, subscribe to the morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe and Matt. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.